In the very heart of Wales, among green hills and endless mist, lies the Bennea Brecaniog National Park, aka Brecon Beacons. There you can see vast open spaces, moss-covered boulders, and upland bogs that feed local rivers and support rare plants. Incredible beauty. And now they've started scattering sheep's wool around here. Well, sure, there are different ways to decorate a landscape, but wool? That's pretty weird. However, it's all part of the plan. We'll explain what's going on. Here's Wales, and here are the sheep. Historical events have tied them together so tightly that now we have a part of the UK where about 9 million sheep roam. Sure, there are countries where sheep farming's so widespread that their numbers go well into the tens or even hundreds of millions, but the population of Wales is just 3 million people. So if you split all the animals among the country's population, it turns out that there are about 3 sheep for every person. And surely every one of those people knows Wales is so closely tied to these curly animals that you can even visit a wool museum. Yeah, it really exists, and it's located in the village of Drefach Falendra. But still, sheep wouldn't be raised just to create museums and enjoy the sight of these cute hoofed animals. They've been a major part of the country's economy for a long time. After all, sheep mean meat and wool. In 2023, the country produced 46.1 thousand tons of lamb, and it's the lamb from Wales that's considered special. Rolling hills, plenty of rain, rich pasture growth, and traditional sheep farming methods, all these things, as claimed, give the local lamb its unique taste. So unique that it got the PGI label, or Protected Geographical Indication. That means everyone knows exactly which lamb comes from Wales and that this product has unique qualities. For this reason, such lamb is also guaranteed income for Welsh shepherds, and unfortunately the only one. What about the wool? Well, that's got some problems. In Wales, they don't have merinos, the famous breed that produces loads of pounds of wool, perfect for the most premium clothes. Here they have tough Welsh mountain sheep. Their toughness shows not only because they handle the not-so-ideal climate and terrain of Wales, thanks to their ability to survive in such conditions, they ended up with, let's say, rough wool, which, while still good for clothing, is often used for carpets, upholstery, and stuff where softness isn't always needed. In 2017-2018, Wales sheared its sheep and got about 17 million pounds of wool. And here's the problem. That's kinda low for 9 million sheep. Synthetic alternatives kept spreading more and more around the world, and people realized they could switch to something else that's more durable and tougher. In the end, demand for sheep's wool, especially the Welsh kind, started to drop big time. On top of that, global shocks like COVID played a role. For example, in 2020, just when Welsh sheep farmers were getting ready to sell their wool, world prices for 2 pounds of the stuff fell from £1 sterling to 50 pence. Then the situation got better, but selling wool still doesn't quite make it a profitable business. As of May 2025, 2 pounds of wool costs about 5.7 pounds sterling. Plus, shearing a sheep often costs more than selling raw wool. And if not, you still have to collect it, pack it, store it, transport it. All of that costs money. In the end, if you don't lose money, you're somewhere around breaking even. What if you don't shear sheep and just sell the meat? You can't do that, because sheep need to be sheared. For thousands of years under farmers' care, even tough Welsh sheep have lost the ability to shed their coats naturally. By the way, that's why all domestic sheep need shearing at all. In the end, often Welsh farmers' lives come down to shearing their sheep, realizing it's not worth selling the wool, and then throwing it away, burning it, or burying it somewhere. But recently, it's possible to call the Brecon Beacons National Park. The staff will take away all the unwanted wool, plus you'll get praise for saving nature. But how are nature and wool connected? To figure it out, let's head over to the national park. Picture this. 80% of Wales is involved in sheep farming, and it's been that way for a very long time. One spot is Brecon Beacons Park, where sheep have been stomping the soil and grazing for at least 200 years. On top of that, the park's team mentions on their site that uncontrolled fires have been going wild for as long, spreading over big stretches and burning the grass cover. To make sure of all this, a huge number of visitors come here, about 4.4 million people every year. What do? The same as the sheep. No, they don't eat the grass. For the local nature, it's enough that they stomp on it hard. So what's the outcome? The grassy cover in the park areas is shrinking. Therefore, bare patches start showing up in the green spaces. Because of this, the main feature of Brecon Beacons, the peat bogs, gets exposed. The plants have roots, even the tiniest ones. When a peat bog gets covered with plants, it acts like a kind of stabilization, meaning the wind blows. The peat bog is safe, rain pours down, it's still fine. When the grass cover disappears, any natural impact causes the peatland to either blow away or wash away with the rain falling from the sky. Over time, nothing is left in place. Erosion, plain and simple. As part of the Brecon Beacon's peatland protection project, they lay wool right over some of the bare spots, creating a kind of blanket. Not green, of course, but it works. When drops of rain fall from the sky, they meet the woolly cover. It doesn't let moisture, especially too much of it, get to the fragile peatland, so the wool is like a shield or barrier that saves the delicate surface from erosion. Also, wool has high absorbency, meaning it can soak up and hold moisture. In the end, when it rains, the peat bog doesn't get washed away, but stays in the wool. After that, all this moisture slowly releases to the surface under the wool blanket. And peatlands like it because steady and consistent moisture is exactly why they exist and don't break down. The very formation of peat, which makes up peatlands, is a process where water is an essential part. It all happens in bogs or wetlands where water pushes air out from the soil pores, creating an oxygen-free setting. Because of this, the activity of most microorganisms that break down material slows down a lot, letting dead plants stack up layer after layer over thousands of years. That's how peat's made. And it's the constant moisture that keeps peat in a condition for further development. The green cover disappears, moisture stops steadily soaking into the peatland, which causes it to dry out and break down. Wool temporarily steps in for plants in this water-releasing job, basically saving the vulnerable layer from dying. It's worth mentioning that erosion can cause channels to form. Because of these, peatlands lose water even faster, especially if there are no wool blankets. The rain passes, water flows into the formed channel, and then goes somewhere it shouldn't. There is a solution, and it's wool again. Wrapped in a mesh, a mass of wool shaped like a cylinder works just like something made by humans. It creates a kind of dam that blocks the flow of water. However, unlike concrete structures, wool dams in the park are always water-permeable barriers. After setting up such a structure, the water stops draining. It stays and lets the peatlands soak up this, as we've already realized, precious resource. Wool also has a high nitrogen content, is rich in keratin, and contains phosphorus and potassium, and it breaks down, which lets it give plants useful nutrients. True, the release happens very slowly. Sounds like a downside, but definitely not for peatlands, which are oligotrophic or nutrient-poor ecosystems. They simply don't need excessive or fast turning into fertile soil, which wool handles just right. That's the perfect fuel for sphagnum mosses, which are the main plants that make up peat. What's more, as the national park representatives say, these plants are so crucial to the peatlands that without them, the peatlands can't sustain themselves. Does that mean these are the key plants? It couldn't be any other way. These mosses can hold 16 to 26 times more water, the perfect shield for peat bogs against erosion caused by too much water. On top of that, members of this genus slowly release large amounts of liquid, which is just what the peat needs for steady saturation. In particular, it's this moss that the park has lost in many places for the reasons we already told you about. Meanwhile, many areas recently stabilized using sheep's wool are often far away from healthy peatlands where sphagnum moss grows. That's why natural moss colonization of these restored spots is either impossible or really tough. That's actually why, after laying down the wool, which brings the peatlands back to normal, local experts started reintroducing moss to restore that green cover, which is an essential part of the local ecosystem. So the proactive people in the park take sphagnum in the form of bushy plants, which were either grown or collected on local commercial sites, and then manually plant them on the woolly peat bogs. However, the work to restore the cover doesn't stop there, because moss isn't the only thing normal peatlands have. People take other plants and plant them in degraded spots that can't recover on their own or where the process would take way too long. In the end, the local peatlands get a green cover with moss and other plants, which, for example, have an extensive root system that protects the vulnerable area from that very erosion. All the plants combined are the reason why the park's marshy and peatlands begin to attract a broad variety of wild animals. For example, on restored peatlands, invertebrates show up quickly. Along with them, suddenly, plants might appear that really know how to get food on poor soils. Insect eaters like sundews, butterworts, and bladderworts, all of them built to catch and digest tiny invertebrates. Invertebrates are also food for birds, so you can then spot the golden plover and the dunlin. After that, birds like golden eagles and short-eared owls show up, and some areas might even support breeding of certain bird species. And that's just part of all the wildlife in the national park that gets a habitat after the peatlands recover. This is probably the coolest wool story you can think of. It was on a Welsh sheep, then it got shorn, and after that it went to Brecon Beacons Park, where it turned into a super important part, the base for bringing an entire ecosystem back to life. But that's not all wool does. What do you think about it playing a part in keeping enough water for drinking? It sounds quite odd, but using wool to restore peat bogs is actually tied to that. See, the peatlands and bogs in the park hold water and then gradually let it flow into creeks and rivers. Those water sources provide the Dor Cymru Welsh water with no less than half of their daily drinking water. Besides, a damaged peat bog releases dissolved carbon, peat sludge, and other compounds, all of which affect the water quality in the park's drinking reservoirs. So gradually restoring peat bogs improves water quality and cuts down the cost of water treatment facilities. Peat bogs restored with wool and in good shape also protect against terrible natural disasters like wildfires. Peat is a bunch of plants that haven't rotted away. And what's a bunch of plants that haven't rotted away? It's literally a stash of fuel that doesn't usually flare up like a forest fire. It just smolders if there's not enough moisture around. So peat can smolder for months, even years, basically for a really long time, because smoldering by definition isn't as fast as a regular fire. Peat bogs are also huge storage spaces for flammable stuff. If you're unlucky, the whole thing turns into a massive fire that burns down everything in its path. For example, the 2023 peat fires in Indonesia burned through 1.5 million acres of peatlands. And in the extremely dry years of 2015 and 2019, that figure reportedly was even higher. What did it lead to? A disaster. The thick haze from the peat fires carries particles small enough to get into the lungs and then into the bloodstream. The result is stroke, heart disease, lung cancer, and asthma. So, for example, a 2022 study showed that pollution from peat fires in Sumatra and Kalimantan over 5 years, starting in 2013, caused around 33,100 premature adult deaths and 2,900 infant deaths every year, along with thousands of hospitalizations and severe asthma cases in kids. Let's not even get into how much the economy lost because of these fires. We're talking billions of dollars. Of course, Brecon Beacons Park doesn't have peatlands that huge. According to some estimates, the Welsh Natural Treasure has around 39,000 acres. Still, a fire on even that much land wouldn't be a good thing. Long story short, the person who handed over the wool to the park is, in a way, helping save it from a nightmare. Think we've covered all the good things about wool? Nope. Up next is cutting down carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. Once again, we're going back to what peatlands are made of. These are undecomposed plants that, over their lifetime, absorbed a massive amount of carbon. All of them ended up forming peat, which according to some sources is made up of 50 to 60% carbon. According to the International Union for Conservation of Nature, today's total area of natural peatlands is more than 1.2 million square miles, and together they absorb about 0.36 gigatons of CO2 per year. The amount of carbon dioxide stored in peat exceeds 600 gigatons, which makes up around 44% of all soil carbon and beats the amount of CO2 locked in all other types of vegetation, including the world's forests. When peatlands dry out, all the CO2 they've been holding in gets released into the air. You can really grasp the scale of this from info by the same Nature and Biodiversity Conservation Union. They say that every year, drained peatlands emit 1.9 gigatons of CO2, which is about 5% of all global man-made greenhouse gas emissions. And that's even though damaged peatlands only cover 0.3% of the Earth's land surface. So bringing peatlands back to life is a huge win for our planet. And as we've already said, wool helps make that happen. In Wales, there's loads of unwanted wool no one plans to sell, so the idea to use it for saving the peatlands of Brecon Beacons Park is just brilliant. But some might think it's all a bit too much hassle with that wool, and that's where plain old stones could come to the rescue. We're talking about the North Pennines National Landscape just over in England. Peat bogs are widespread there too, and naturally all the local experts understand how crucial they are, so they kicked off restoration efforts as early as 2005. Stones are used here to block the channels caused by peat erosion, which end up making already fragile areas dry out even faster. The dam ends up being just as permeable as one made from sheep's wool. This lets you avoid overdoing water retention and fill the peat bogs gradually. And overall, the principle works exactly the same way. However, this method of blocking water is probably a bit simpler. Hauling wool dams to the right spot sounds like an easier job than moving stones, but stones don't grow on some animal that needs to be sheared. They're just chunks of rock lying around everywhere, which makes them way easier to handle. Plus, no one hauls stones by hand in North Pennines National Landscape. The local nature conservation team has helicopters set up for that. They fly in, drop a bunch of stones exactly where they need to go, and then fly off. The only manual work left is shifting a stone that maybe landed a bit off. Does it work? With a comprehensive approach, which besides laying stone dams includes many other actions like planting vegetation, proactive people have already managed to restore a large area of peatlands, and now they're saying that active efforts are underway to restore as many as 50,000 vulnerable 1,000-year-old organic stores. In conclusion, it's important to say that other countries also do things like this. It's not a strategy unique to the British Isles. Still, no matter where or how it's done, any good impact on peatlands deserves recognition. You've seen for yourself how helpful they are.